FDM printing miniatures has come a long way, but in my opinion, the biggest thing still holding it back is automatic supports. Tree supports have been a very welcome innovation in the FDM space in recent years, and in tandem with many other small tweaks and features, we can now finally print very small and detailed things easily and reliably. However, these supports are often really difficult to remove. They can sometimes make it hard to tell where they even end and the model begins. They often leave a bad surface finish where they were contacting, and they can just in general end up taking a really long time to methodically go through and carefully remove. But even with a lot of patience, you're still likely to end up with a broken bit or two. So when Tias from Arbiter Miniatures reached out to me via email to let me know about a little project he's been working on called Advanced FDM, showing off results like this, well, needless to say, he immediately captured my attention. And Advanced FDM has jumped right to the top of my do that right this instant list. So Advanced FDM in a nutshell is basically a marriage of thoughtful design that minimizes the overhangs and islands, reducing the overall requirement for supports, but also, and drumroll, resin supports? So this is really what piqued my interest here, because I have a pretty long history at this point with resin supports. I started the Mini Rater project, which is a rating system for 3D printable miniatures, pre-supported files, and how good or bad they are. I made some money doing pre-supports myself professionally for a little while, and I've even taught many others how to support models successfully themselves as well. So I like to think I know my way around these little sticks pretty well at this point, and to see them here on models intended to be printed on FDM machines, and apparently with great results too, well, that's just too interesting to not look into. So stick around, we're gonna really be pushing the limits of FDM printing here in this one, building upon what Tias has started here with his Advanced FDM, and we're gonna be getting results like this here, with miniatures not even designed for FDM printing in mind. Like, look at those fingers. Look at them. Look at mine. Look at these. Hey, real quick, do me a favor, would you? Just double check that you're subscribed down there, and why not turn on notifications while you're at it as well? I've not done a great job at asking for help with that, and it really would go a long way in helping this channel stay afloat. So the first model from Arbiter Miniatures that I decided to print up is the Hellgate Cultist. Now, Arbiter Miniatures has a few recommendations, and I'm going to leave a link to his video down below, which I'm going to recommend you check out as well if you're interested in this. And this model, by the way, the Hellgate Cultist, is completely free, so you can go download this one too and print along. There's really two key recommendations that jump out to me that I'm going to be following just to start things off. The first of which is we're going to be using a Bambu Labs A1 printer. And the second is we're going to be using the Fat Dragon Games print profiles. So these are also free, and I'll leave a link down below to where you can get those too. So I downloaded and installed the Fat Dragon Games profile myself. That was really easy. Dragged the Hellgate Cultist into the Bambu Studio slicer, selected the new print profile, sliced it, and sent it. Oh, and we are also, of course, using a 0.2mm nozzle with the A1 printer. We're also using Bambu Lab matte PLA green for this one, and the print in total took about 6 hours. And wow, these results are incredibly impressive. The print turned out great, and the supports almost peel away as easily as resin supports. But I think I rushed in. There was some damage at the bottom of the cape, but overall, just incredible. Dude. The model has thoughtfully been cut up and supported in multiple parts, and that's really one of the big strengths here of this approach that Tias has taken. Because through thoughtful design, clever splitting, and then careful supporting, you can get a result like this. And I'm blown away, and I'm very excited to continue down this rabbit hole. And so off the back of that first initial success, I then went and downloaded the Dragonkin, the other Advanced FDM Mini by Arbiter Miniatures. This one is a paid one, but he provided it for me to try out. Brought it into the slicer and prepared it for printing. This one was going to take a little bit longer at about 10 hours, but that was okay. I ran it overnight. But unfortunately, this one was not successful. It looks like both of the hands of the miniature failed spectacularly, as well as the head. It's funny the similarities to resin here now. If you look closely at the supports, you can see that they've printed fine, for the most part, all the way up to their very tips, at which point it looks like the models have just become disconnected and then failed to print. Now, TS actually recommends that you use a very specific filament for these miniatures, in addition to the Bambu Lab A1 with the 0.2 nozzle and the Fat Dragon's profile. And that is Sunlu PLA Meta, which, if I understand right, is a very high flow PLA, and it's very well suited to miniatures. So let's give that a go. I've had a spool here running overnight in my filament dryer. This one's by Ibos. I like it a lot. So I got that loaded up and I re-sliced those failed bits, so the arms and the head, and I sent it. And look at that, we got a successful print. This time I took a lot more care when removing the supports and used some snips. And it was maybe a bit stringier than I'd hoped, but otherwise these parts do look pretty good. And so here's how that mini turned out when all the parts were put together. Not a bad result at all. And such a cool and dynamic pose too. I really love this one. But just out of curiosity, I wanted to try the Bambu Lab Matte PLA again because I like how not stringy that stuff is, and I think it has a really nice surface finish for these small detailed parts. And the keen eye among you will have noticed that I also had a spool of this stuff drying as well in the Ibos. This is a light grey matte PLA, and so I loaded that into printer and tried running the exact same print again. And amazingly, it failed in the exact same way as the Bambu Lab Matte Green PLA from before. So that's interesting. I guess for now, we're going to stick to the Sunlu Meta, but we'll come back to other PLAs shortly. In the meantime, the next thing I really wanted to try was, I wanted to know what would happen if we take a model that had been pre-supported for resin with no intention of being printed in FDM at all, and tried slicing and printing that. So I did exactly that. I grabbed some pre-supported models from this month's Once in a Six Side member collection. I'll talk more about that in a little bit if you want to get these as well, and a bunch of other cool minis to help support this channel. We've got here a Crazy Skeleton by Armians 3D and a Witch Hunter by Infernal Miniatures. Now, I did have little hope going into this that it would even work at all, and so it was a really great surprise to see that in fact these both fully printed. However, they were stringy as fuck. Probably because those support stems are just so plentiful and so thin as well. So it's a perfect storm for stringing. Now, they weren't too difficult to remove from the models, and because they were so thin and delicate, I could even sort of just like crush them away really easily. Unfortunately though, I did break off both of the skeleton's feet, and the surface finish doesn't look nearly as nice as those previous minis. So it's time, I think, to do some investigating. And the first thing I wanted to do was inspect the files to see if I could glean any insights there. But sadly, there were no .lys files included with the Arbiter miniatures. This would have been really handy to sort of see the different settings that were used. So I did the next best thing I could, and I measured the actual printed supports that I had on hand using some calipers. And it looks like they're right around 1.9 millimeters thick. So that's good to know. However, something I can't really figure out here with the calipers is how large, or small rather, those contact points are at the very ends of the supports. This is much harder to determine without having the LYS files. But we do have LYS files for the Armians 3D and Infernal Miniatures minis, whose supports, as I was removing them, I noticed felt very similarly attached as Arbiters were. So maybe these will be a great starting point. And my lights died? I gotta figure out why my light died. Hello? Come back. So after spending some time inspecting these files, it looks like for our support tips, we're going to be somewhere in the 0.25 to 0.3 millimeter range. So let's configure ourselves a new support profile here and try just doing some manual supports ourselves. Now, I am using the Litchi Pro version here. To date, I've still not encountered any other application that is anywhere close to how good this program is at manual support placement specifically. I actually hate Litchi as a slicer. I think it's a bloated piece of crap, but for its manual support tools, nothing else comes close. And unfortunately, it is a subscription to get some of the more useful features here. So I just have to let you know about that before we go any further. I know, it sucks. Leave a comment if you think they should have a lifetime license. I know for me personally, I'd pay for one in a heartbeat, because I hate subscriptions so much. Like, just let me own it, please. Anyway, so to support this miniature, my thinking here is to treat this in the same way that we would treat any miniature that we're supporting for resin printing. With one major difference in that we're going to ignore basically all the tiny little islands and just focus on ensuring that the key areas and overhangs are supported. Ideally, every model would be sculpted with this printing style in mind to minimize all those tiny little islands, but whatever, let's just see how we get on. I begun by applying my heavies in as few spots as possible, as I know these are the ones I'm definitely going to want to go in first and clip away after that print is finished. I also, wherever possible here, tried to override Lychee's angling of those support stems to make them vertical. My thinking here is that it's just going to be easier for the mechanics with FDM printing to not have to divert from a straight up and down structure suddenly to an angled one. I then switched over to my mediums and started adding some reinforcement, finally switching into the light supports, just using them to try and add a little bit more reinforcement in a few areas and support some of those smaller islands, trying my best not to overcrowd the model here. And then once that was done, I exported the STL with the supports, brought it into the slicer, and sent it. And wow, okay, that's pretty good. It's not perfect, but we got closer here on our first try than I thought we would have. The axe clearly has failed in a couple of spots, like at the very bottom and at the top. And if we turn it around, you can see the cape as well got all kinds of messed up. But otherwise, it's mostly there and it's looking pretty decent. The supports also came away pretty easily, although I did forget to clip the one on the foot and so did rip a leg off in the process. Let's make some revisions. And look at that, we got a fully successful print here, but man, is it stringy. These supports also came away nicely and everything printed, so I think we're on the right track here. So I then switched back to the Bamboo Lab matte PLA and catastrophic failure. Goddamn, I really want this filament to work and I'm determined to do so. So I jumped back into Lychee and increased all of the support tips size by 150%, sent it again, and new insight gleamed. It's failed again. And upon looking closely at why it's failed, it looks like the supports are actually snapping really early on. Like here and here, they've just broken right off. So let's try thickening those stems up too. And maybe we'll just add a couple more supports just to be safe. And ladies and gentlemen, we did it. Look at this mini. There is a couple of spots where those supports wanted to fail again, but they appear to have recovered and pulled through. And you know what? Removing these was just as easy as before. I just took it slow and nipped away carefully at the key areas, and then it just released. And look at the quality of this guy. And it should be noted that this is basically a worst case scenario for an FDM Mini. Everything here is extremely thin and delicate, but it's all intact. It's all here with a pretty good surface finish too. Here he is next to the Sunlu Meta one from before. And while the Sunlu one is definitely better in some ways, like the overhangs, in general, I like the finish a lot nicer on the matte PLA, given that huge reduction in stringing. And I can guarantee you, if I tried to print this model with tree supports, there's no way in hell we'd get a result this good. In fact, I'm pretty sure it would have broken into 50 pieces if I tried. So, okay, now that we've got this working, let's tackle a mini that should be a bit easier. This is the Witch Hunter from Infernal Miniatures, and I've also got a Marine here. This is a Fire Forged by Daka Store, and I'm going to use the exact same support settings from before, get everything anchored in place, reinforced, and then exported to STLs, sliced up, and sent to the printer. But before I do that, please allow me to just tell you where you can get all these files, and also help keep this channel going in the process. It would mean a great deal to me if you could check out the links down below for Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon or even YouTube membership. Consider becoming a member on either of these three platforms, whichever is the least amount of friction for you. You'll really be doing me a massive solid in helping to keep this channel going and more importantly, grow and do more cool things here. And in return for your financial support, I've got a ton of cool models here for you, including these miniatures that I'm about to print up here. And these miniatures are a limited time reward for the month of February 2025. So do hurry and get these while you can. I do find that little bit of FOMO does definitely help the business side of things here. And so in total this month, we have models from Arcane Whiskers, Armians 3D, Artificers Mini, Daka Store, Imp 3D Sion, Infernal Miniatures, Leia Safe, Lucas with a C, Moid, and Stoneforge. But not only will you get all of these models if you come sign up today, you're also going to get everything that's in the Once in a Six Side welcome pack. And those models are not time restricted. They're always going to be available and there's just heaps of cool stuff in there. You're also going to get to join our wonderful Discord. And then once you're in there, you can get excellent print support. You can also get involved in our wonderful print and paint events that we do every single month here. And so I thank you very much for your support. And before we get back to the video, I'd just quickly like to let you know about a few active campaigns from a couple of these artists that you might want to know about. So from Armians 3D, we've got the Crazy Skeleton collection, which is live on My Mini Factory Frontiers right now. And this is a very wonderful collection of just the cutest little crazy skeleton sculpts. I'm a big fan of these. I think you will be too. There's also Millennium Wars Volume 2, Forgeborn and Blessed Ones by Daka Daka Store, coming soon on Kickstarter. So if you're a fan of Space Marines, I think you're really going to like this one. So come get signed up so you can get notified when this one goes live. And finally, also on Kickstarter from Infernal Miniatures, is the Inquisition Religious Zealots Mega Pack. So you fans of fantasy, I think you're really going to dig these sculpts. They are just, they're so characterful. I love them. Especially the knights. Look how cool they are. So all right, big thanks to all these artists. Big thanks to everyone who can throw their support behind this channel. Hope you enjoy the miniatures. Now let's get back to the video. Because none of these miniatures were multi-part, this was a little bit tricky. Some supports did have to be tucked in awkwardly, but fingers crossed we don't have too much trouble removing these. Again, this is where how the model is actually sculpted and then cut up comes into play in a big way for printing in FDM. But in any case, here's our results, and they're pretty clean. Not a complete success, unfortunately, but not bad either for a first attempt on these two dudes using the Bamboo Lab PLA. The thicker sticks is definitely helping overcome that snapping issue, and I'm loving how easy these supports come away with just a little bit of nipping. The Marine turned out the best, although his tunic did fail a little bit and the cables on his weapon unfortunately didn't survive, but otherwise, pretty damn clean. The Witch Hunter was a little bit worse off, unfortunately. Neither of the weapons succeeded, but again, everything else looks great. It's a shame that this PLA fails so easily, because the Sunlu is just too stringy for me personally. So maybe let's try another one. This is Creality Hyper PLA, and my theory is here that because this is like a high speed PLA, it should also be high flow, so maybe it'll work well for miniatures. And holy shit, this might be the best one yet. There's like no stringing at all, and at first glance it looks like everything's there, including the Witch Hunter's weapons, like his crossbow. Look at that thing. The supports, again, it looks like snapped in one or two places, but did manage to recover. And I noticed as well that removing these supports was a little bit tougher than the matte PLA. So maybe this Creality stuff falls somewhere between the Sunlu and the Bamboo Lab in terms of its like flow and durability. But anyway, look at this. The Marine's cables on his gun did fail again, so I'm pretty sure I just need to add a couple of extra supports there. But otherwise, both of these dudes turned out fantastic. I think this might be my favorite miniatures PLA yet. Now to close this video out, I'm going to take everything that I've learned here so far and really push this process to the limits. And I have a couple more models here that I think are perfect for the task. The first is a Berserker Demon by Moid, but this one actually shouldn't be too bad overall. It's broken up into multiple parts, and that should really make things pretty straightforward here, at least so far as adding the supports goes, but there's just no way around this demon's left hand. Those little fingers will be a challenge to print for sure, and the spikes on the pommel of the sword as well will not be easy either. This next one though, this is the Venom Shaman by Stoneforge, and this guy right here is going to be just an absolute nightmare to print in FDM. Like, check out the snake head hanging out at the top of his staff there, and its little itty bitty snake tongue flicking the air. The staff as well, how it starts at that very fine point with those leaves, and that's the case no matter how I orient this thing, because this one isn't multi-part at all. And even more delicate here is all those tattered rags that the shaman is wearing with all the little frayed edges. I don't think you could ask for a more anti-FDM mini, but in any case, I did my best here to get both of these fully supported, and just look at these results. I took my time and was very careful to remove these supports, but at no point did it really feel like challenging, because it's so easy to tell what is support and what's model. And so if you just take your time and you just clip away at those support tips, they just come away and reveal the model. And if you've spent a lot of time removing tree supports from little miniatures like this, I think you're really going to appreciate how much of an improvement this is to the overall experience. And just look at the results. Like, everything is there. Every single one of those little jagged edges around the cloak, the little itty bitty snake tongue, its tail with the rattle, everything. And it looks incredible. And these models, sure, they're still FDM printed, so if you hold them up really close to your face, you can tell they're FDM printed. But at arm's length, they look amazing, especially the shaman. The details on this guy are so small, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's resin printed unless you look at it really closely. Now, I've also been testing out another printer here. This is the FlashForge Adventurer 5M Pro, and I've been using it with their 0.25mm nozzle. And I decided to see if I could copy over the Fat Dragon Games print profile and see if I could get similar results. And I printed all of the same miniatures here, and while they've not come out quite as good as the Bamboo Lab ones, they're bloody close. And I think this is really encouraging and should mean that similar results hopefully are going to be possible across a wide range of these modern printers. And also, just in case you're not grasping like how small these minis are and just how tiny their fine details really are, here's some familiar items for reference. I find it's easy when watching videos to sort of lose that sense of scale, so I hope that helps put into perspective here just how insane these results are. So yeah, I am thoroughly impressed with what we've been able to achieve here today. So what did we learn? Well, the biggest differences between these supports when it comes to resin versus FDM is that resin miniatures will have far more supports, but they will be a lot smaller. FDM supports, the fewer you can get away with using, the better, and it really doesn't hurt to go large. If you go too large on resin, they become extremely difficult to remove, which is just not the case at all here with FDM. The more elastic your PLA is as well, the better. So basically, I think all of the fast PLAs are going to be good choices, and the more brittle PLAs are likely to fail at the supports. However, you can overcome that by just beefing up those sticks. And I haven't found any downside at all here to using the thicker sticks, so I think it would actually make a lot of sense to just default to them regardless of whatever PLA you intend on using. And if you do have to add lots of supports and that ends up obscuring visibility of the model somewhat, it's still going to be really obvious what is support and what isn't, so you should still be a lot less likely to accidentally damage the model when removing them. If you are going to be using a lot of supports though, it is likely going to have a lot more potential for stringing. So for those jobs, you probably wouldn't want to use the Sunlu Meta PLA, for example. Filament drying seems to make no difference at all. The Meta PLA was still stringy as hell, and the matte PLA still a bit brittle, and that's both after a deep, thorough drying, so don't feel the need to run out and buy one of these. I'm not yet convinced that they're useful for PLA, at least not yet based off of these limited tests here. Here are all the support settings I landed on. Feel free to use these as a jumping off point for your own miniatures and materials, and tweak them and experiment as you see fit. I feel confident that these settings are going to work across a wide range of PLAs, so long as the models have actually been supported appropriately. And on the topic of supports, here are some more pointers for you. If you have no choice but to start a support on the model, like here on this guy's boot, just use the heavy support, even if you only need a light one on the other end. Or, if you do use a light support, just make sure you come back in here and adjust that starting contact point to be more substantial, because you don't want it breaking off here mid-print, and the scarring is going to be extremely minimal after you snip it off, so don't worry about using the larger size here. If you clip the main support bodies into one another, like overlap them, this definitely helps add a lot of strength and makes the supports less likely to break on their way up. But this technique here, where you don't send a support all the way to ground and instead angle it into a neighboring support, this seems to produce poor results and increases chances of failure, which I think reinforces the idea here that you want these things to be as vertical as much as you can possibly get away with. This whole process is really no different than supporting for resin. Treat your big islands first. For example, consider the whole leg an island and brace it accordingly with heavies, and then go back and reinforce it with mediums. And if there's any little tiny islands left over, you can then go in and hit those with your lights. Also, try and keep your sticks vertical as best you can. Sometimes you do have to lean them, but if you can avoid it, I think it helps a lot here to keep them as strong as possible during printing. And that is all. If you're looking for more knowledge on pre-supporting miniatures, go check out this video first, and then once your brain has been primed with those fundamentals, you can head on over to this other one to get the nitty-gritty details with lots of examples. So that's going to do it for this video. Thank you, Tice, for reaching out and sending me down this rabbit hole. This has been really cool. I hope this information proves useful to you guys. I hope you can level up your FDM printed miniatures game and just experience in general. I think this is a much better experience than the automatic tree supports. I guess the big trade-off though is you do have to learn how to do these manual supports, and it does take a bit of patience and a bit of time. Also, I can't recommend enough that you are set up ergonomically at your computer when you do this, because there is a lot of potential for repetitive strain injury, lots of clicking, lots of keyboard shortcuts. Don't forget, Patreon, buy me a coffee, YouTube, lots of models. All right, see you next time.